Those two issues are important. However, they are not captivating or registering, if you will, or what we call resonating with the young people. And so we've got to find a way to bring our message beyond those two principles. And those principles are important. Here's where I believe we can win the day. Here is how I believe that we can capture the hearts and minds of Americans across this nation who are feeling very uncomfortable about what's happening in Washington, D.C. Our message should be a return to the founding principles that made this nation. Those principles are vast and they are many. Matthew Spaulding, in his book called We Still Hold These Truths. Isn't that a great title? We still hold these truths. We're holding on to what truths? The first principles that made this nation great. There is no question about it. When you look at the history of this nation, our success is tied into those principles and the Judeo-Christian frame that undergirds those principles. And we must return to them. We've lost our way. We have lost our way. Our compass is broken. To right this ship, we must return to those principles. Mark Levin, in his book Liberty and Tyranny, says conservatism is the antidote to tyranny, precisely because its principles are the founding principles. Therein, in that statement, is what is required of us to rescue this republic. If, in fact, tyranny is in check or put in check by the founding principles, then it is the founding principles that will push back against tyranny that comes to us in the form of excessive government regulation and excessive intrusion of government into our lives. It is those principles that will rescue us. But here's the hard, miserable, cold fact. Many of us do not know what those principles are. Right now, going viral on the internet is Dennis Prager's answer to a question. Why are we in trouble like this in America? And he answers. He says, we are in trouble like this because the greatest generation, those who came out of WW2, lost their compass and lost their connection with those founding principles. And they failed to communicate it to their children. They were more concerned about giving them material wealth, helping them not to struggle as they struggle. And they failed to teach them those principles. Men and women, the fix is to reintroduce, to recast in America our founding principles again, to talk about it to our children, to get on television and write about it and blog about it and get on the internet, and every time you see a Republican, we ought to be talking about founding principles. We ought to be talking about that which made this nation great. Matthew Spaulding says there are 10 that he believes that ought to be sounded across this nation. May I share with him? May I share them with you right now? Liberty, equality, national rights, consent of the governed, religious freedom, private property, the rule of law, constitutionalism, self-government, and independence. I submit to you, men and women, those principles can save the day. We must return to them. We must champion them. We must articulate them. We must demand that our leaders implement them as they do legislation in Washington, D.C. It is my intent to go to Washington and to use as the filter of my legislative process the Constitution of this great land. Amen. I've been studying the history of our nation, and America was founded on a religious-based heritage of freedom under law. And the essence of that liberty is the proper limitation of government. The essence of the liberty is the proper limitation of government. You see, the neocons believe that sometimes we who are conservative go too far in our hatred of the government. We don't hate government. We believe that there's a proper limitation for government. And the proper limitation for government is the Constitution. The Constitution was written not to govern the people, but to govern the government. That's why it was written. And we need to return to the constitutional form of government. This crowd in Washington, D.C. is trampling upon the Constitution, and we must stop them. We must say no more, and we do that at the polls. Many have asked me, Pastor Broden, do you believe in term limitations? I said yes, as it is defined in the Constitution. When we don't like what we're doing, what they are doing, we vote them out. That's the term limitation. We can hold them accountable. And you hold them accountable by staying on top of the game. You see, what we've done is abdicated, sort of voted them and go home and go to sleep. That's the wrong way of exercising our responsibility, our stewardship responsibility to protect this freedom that God has given to us. What we do is we watch them, we call them, we talk to them, and we evaluate them, and we determine whether they should continue or not, based upon what they are doing. And what I've come to know about politicians is politicians want your vote. And you can say, you want my vote? Govern through the Constitution. If you don't do that, see ya, wouldn't want to be. What's happening to us, men and women, is not by accident, it's by design. Let's take just a few moments and let me just sort of give you a little history here of what's happening. What is happening, I believe, is that we have allowed a bunch of Fabianists into our government. What are Fabianists? Fabianists, the name Fabian, comes from Fabian Maximus, who was a general, a famous general in the Roman army who fought with Hannibal. And his claim to fame was, abide your time until you would strike hard. In other words, Fabian said, you wait until the moment is right to strike. When you do, you pounce hard and you pounce quickly. Swiftly and quickly. Fabianists have been infiltrating our government since Woodrow Wilson. And they have been biding their time. Setting up their systems. Influencing our leadership. And they believe right now is the time to pounce. Here's what their philosophy is. Sidney J. Webb and his wife Beatrice Webb were the leaders in 1884 and 1889 in writing essays which they call Facts for Socialists and Fabian essays in socialism. George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, all of these were Fabian socialists, and they wrote and they influenced the so-called elite into believing that socialism was best for controlling the masses. And as they developed their theory, they came up with this philosophy: an ounce of theory with a ton of practice.